Hello, everybody. My name is Brett, and I'm going to be presenting about manufacturing today. Thanks for joining. Very excited to have you here. So today we're going to move pretty quickly, but it's okay because we're going to have it recorded, so you'll be able to watch it later if you need to. The purpose of today's meeting, it's not supposed to be a training, so I'm sorry if you were hoping for a really complicated training, but it is going to be a overall overview of the platform and hopefully give you a lot more information about it. And my goal is to hopefully have you learn something from it, no matter if you're brand new to Odoo or if you've already been using it for a while. So even though it's not a training, hopefully you'll learn something. So the agenda, like I said, we're going to move pretty quickly. First, I really want to have a quick intro that just says why Odoo MRP, why our manufacturing platform compared to something else out there. Then we're going to go through the basics of it and really highlight how it's integrated with other tools that we have in the Odoo ecosystem. We're going to move ahead and get a little bit more complex as we start to scale things up and add more functionality, as well as talk about more integration with even further apps in the Odoo platform. Then we're going to talk about planning and reporting, which is super important to a lot of people, and highlight the customizability of the platform because that's really one of the key strengths. And then I'll just recap at the end, and we'll be able to have some time for questions at the end too. Feel free to ask questions as we go during the chat. This is an opportunity for you to talk to people that know Odoo manufacturing pretty well and get their perspective on it. So you're welcome to do so. Anything not answered during that period, I'll get to at the end, hopefully. Cool, so let's get into it. So why Odoo MRP? What's so special about it? What's the reason that you want to use our manufacturing platform compared to something else? Because obviously you have a lot of options out there. Basically, I would start by saying we have a really robust and really broadly used suite of apps that can help with manufacturing. And when I say widely used, I mean that in every sense of the word, both geographically as well as industries that it covers, languages, and robust as in it's got a lot of functionality. It's got a lot to offer. So that's a good starting point, right? Common industries, we get this question all the time. Maybe it's already been asked in the chat for all we know of this recording, but people ask, have you done Odoo manufacturing for this industry? Have you done it in this industry? Do you have any examples of using it in this industry? And I think it's good to take a look at it. So I did spend some time reporting on it and kind of dug around. You can actually go to odoo.com/references, I think, or at least Google Odoo references, and you'll be able to go through it by industry. There's actually a lot published online that you can kind of see. But what I saw as a trend and what I've experienced over the years is we work with a lot of electronics. It's a really broad term, but electronics can mean metering devices, it could mean testing equipment, it could mean small scale drones, but very common for us. Furniture, in fact, you'll see that in a lot of our demo data and a lot of our sample data. Furniture is pretty commonly used and it works well. Medical device, it's a huge growing industry, and I'm glad that we have some clients in that field. Cannabis, we've been really lucky that our platform just happens to work really well with cannabis related clients, mostly because of the way that we handle lot tracking, which works really well for seed to sale stuff. Food and supplements, good because of the way we handle expiration dates. Industrial equipment, pretty broad, but it could be really large scale things, even though the manufacturing process might be kind of simple. Printing is great for how customizable we are because there's a lot of companies out there that do custom manufacturing and made to order printing kind of jobs. So we have a lot of clients in that kind of field. Telecommunications, so I'm talking making fiber optics wires, things like that. Job shops for really extreme customizability and every single job being different. And it goes on and on. This is just sort of some of the main things that we've been working with our platform. So as you can see, there's no real specific niche to it. And then a lot of times people also ask, well, where are people actually using Odoo manufacturing? Where are your different clients that have manufacturing installed and running? And so I took a look at that too. Currently, it's over 75 countries worldwide. You'll have Odoo users that are using Odoo manufacturing, which is pretty good. It's a start. There's still more countries to crack into. The countries that have the highest quantity that I saw, leading the pack was the United States, which I was happy about because that's where I've worked over the last 5 years. I lead a team of business advisors that help people evaluate the platform, and we spend a lot of time talking about manufacturing. But also Mexico, which is another region that I kind of help oversee, and a huge amount in Belgium, which is good. We'd hope so, since it's a Belgian company originally. Germany, a lot of manufacturing going on over there. I was surprised to see how much manufacturing clients we have in Egypt, quite a few in Canada, and then there's other countries beyond that. basically kind of spanning the whole globe. And these are just the ones where I saw the most, but like I said, over 75 countries, so it's pretty broadly used. The biggest strengths, this kind of helps explain why we've been able to tackle so many different industries and why we've been able to grow so much, especially in the last 5 years, because we really made manufacturing a heavy duty focus about 5 years ago when we really revised the whole platform to be a big area of focus. And it's really grown substantially since then. And it's largely because of our strengths. It's because of why our platform is good for manufacturing that we've been able to be successful. So I'm going to highlight these 4 things, and I'm going to use that sort of as the framework for this presentation. First off, number one, you'll hear this over and over and over again when talking about Odoo. It's the fact that it's integrated. So it's the fact that the different modules are talking to each other, the data is shared, and what that really gives you is really good workflows. And that's kind of the real value of it. The fact that it's scalable is really important too, because we focus on largely small to mid-sized businesses, but also any company that starts out at a certain size and wants to grow. It helps that our platform allows you to scale up as you go. So you can start simple, you can add to it, and we'll get into that. The fact that it's really user-friendly is really, really important, and I'll highlight that especially as it pertains to planning and reporting. And the fact that it's really, really flexible is not only a strength, but it's also a very unique strength. I truly believe that we are more flexible than pretty much every major manufacturing platform out there around the same scope and around the same size. And I'm going to be able to touch on that at the end too. So let's get into the first section of that. Let's talk about the integration as it pertains to manufacturing basics. So a good way to get acquainted with the manufacturing platform is to start simple, and it will be able to highlight how it's integrated with the rest of the platform as we go. So let's start with an example. I'm just going to go straight to sharing my screen and going through a little demo, and we'll be able to cover some of these basics. I'm going to go fast. I'm not going to go really deep into configuration, but I want to give you an overview. We're going to talk about products and components and how those are used, the bill of materials that decides what goes into your finished products. We're going to talk about how to build a manufacturing order, pretty important. And I'm also going to throw in a couple other features while we're at it, like how we handle units of measure, how we handle variance, and what make to order means for us and how that kind of sits in with it. So we'll get into that. It's actually going to be 2 little workflows, and it's going to be focused around the idea of pretending that we're a company that manufactures toys. I don't know why, maybe it's because I'm immature, but I find that it helps to illustrate the way our manufacturing works. So here's this demo database. You should be able to see this. I have just a few apps installed, but at any time you can install a lot more if you need to. But to focus on what we're going to focus on, all we need is this. I'm going to go straight into manufacturing. And in the manufacturing app, it'll show us a list of manufacturing orders. We don't have any pending right now, but we will. We'll get there. I want to really start with those key components of products and how we handle those. So products in Odoo, if you see right here, we mean that to be finished goods. We also mean that to be components. And if you're using them, it also is used for services and labor, and it's also used for subassemblies. So it's used for a lot of different things. You can view it in lots of different ways, which is the way it works for Odoo across the board. You can view it in icon view or Kanban view. You can view it in list view. But if you want to be more organized, you can always group it by something. And I recommend grouping it by category because that way you can see very easily there are finished goods of different kinds, actually. There's materials like paint. There's all these individual parts, and there's even a subassembly. So this is one way that you can organize it if you want to, and it works for me. I like it. I'm very visually oriented like that. So I want to go ahead and get into this wooden truck toy because that's what we're going to work with first. It's a really, really simple product, but it should help to get you the idea of it. So this product right here, I'm not going to talk about most of this stuff on this screen, but on the product page, some of the key bits of info is that you could see that it belongs to this category right here for organization, of course. Right here, the internal reference, that's kind of like SKU or part number or item code. And I manually entered that. I gave it a number, but you'll find that you can either just import all of your products at once and it'll bring it all in, or you can set up Odoo to generate the number for you if you want, if you configure a sequence in advance and you can determine what kind of prefix, suffix it has and stuff like that. So a lot of control over this field. Sales price is important if you sell it, although we can have more advanced price options if you need, like you can have pricing based on quantities and that kind of stuff. And then here's the cost, which if we want to, we can compute it from the bill of materials, which we'll get into in a little bit. But I'm going to move on from all that and really focus on just a couple quick things first off, it's really important since we build it that we set this thing to manufacture. So I triggered that. This is something we manufacture. Very, very important. It's in the inventory operations route section right here. Since we build it, we need to say that. The other thing we need is we need to have a bill of materials. Anything that you build in Odoo or plan to build in Odoo, you should have a bill of materials or a BOM. So we go into it, we have at least one BOM. And here it is. You can see it right here. It's a very, very simple BOM. It consists of this component right here, truck body, and it consists of a subassembly, which is wheels with an axle. So like I said, very simple product. The subassemblies are handled really well in Odoo and they're really easy to manage. Basically, it has its own BOM, but to see it, I recommend you view the structure and cost, and then you can drill down and just see that the full construction of this product is the truck body, and then the subassembly, which consists of 4 wheels and 2 rods in the middle for the axles. And then you can see the cost over here and roll it up. Lots of different ways to view it. You can print it out if you want, but the BOM structure is a really useful way of seeing it, especially if you're the kind of business that has lots and lots of layers in your BOMs, which we deal with a lot. So that's the basics of that product, and let's just go ahead and do a really simple manufacturing order so you see how that works. You go ahead and create a manufacturing order. I'm going to go ahead and choose that product, which is the truck. And if you want to, you can decide when you're going to start it. You can assign it to a person to oversee it, and it will list out those core components that are going to be used. Looks good to me, so I'm going to go ahead and confirm. It's going to add to your overall schedule. And at this point, it'll let you know if you have components available or not, what we call the forecasted view, or forecasted report. Ooh, that's not a good way to look at that. I think I did something with my wacky little customizations, but in any event, it shows you is it available or not, and it shows you when is it expected to be available, because in this case, I have to build that subassembly first. So if I go to my manufacturing orders list, the way I have it set up right now, it's actually created a second manufacturing order to build the subassembly. So it'll say, you need to take these 4 wheels, you need to take these 2 wooden rods, and then you need to build it. So you might assign this to somebody else, they take care of the subassembly. Once they've built it, they put it together, it's done, it automatically gets allocated to our main product, the truck toy. As you can see, it's now available, and then somebody can work on it. And I don't want to spend too much time on it. Like I said, I'm going to move fast because it's not a training, but there's a lot of things that you might do along the way in terms of the chatter, which is basically a log where you can communicate with your employees, you can schedule activities with it, you can upload attachments and stuff. And so even for a simple manufacturing order, you can get a lot of functionality along the way of how you're building it and stuff. But the other thing I want to highlight for this simple manufacturing order is that what we really did at its core just now, what is the main thing that we actually accomplished by doing that manufacturing order? It really has to do with product moves. Because it's all about kind of materials tracking for something like this. What we did, if you click on that little link right there, is it shows you that we created one wooden truck toy and we consumed these parts right here. And at its very basic core, a manufacturing order in Odoo consumes materials to produce some sort of finished good, and then that gets reflected in your inventory right away. So that's workflow 1. The second one that I'm going to do is going to touch on a few more features, and it's going to be just slightly more involved. So for that, we're going to talk about this product called the airplane right here. And you'll notice that it says 3 variants. So we're going to talk about variants real quick. This wooden airplane toy, I've set it up so that it's actually available in 3 options. You can choose the color for it, red, white, and green. And that affects your manufacturing because it's a slightly different process depending on which color they choose. So over here, you can see the different variants here, and you'll see that each one has a little color-coded picture right there. That's fine. It's great. But more importantly, the bill of materials over here defines which components get used depending on what people choose. So you can actually see right here that it'll use green paint if you need to supply a green plane. And similarly, it'll choose the red component if you need to supply the red one. So let's see how that works. And it's also going to highlight a feature that we have called Make to Order. So I'm going to go ahead and go to Sales. And this is the first time we're leaving the manufacturing app, but I'm going to go into the Sales app, and I'm going to sell something to somebody named John Customer to keep it fairly basic. I'm going to go ahead and choose the airplane. So it's just asking me generic wooden airplane toy. This is what we call the product configurator. It does a pop-up right here and asks me to choose the color, which is kind of nice. So I'm going to go ahead and choose, I'll stick with red, that's fine. But anyway, so you could choose it right here, and then depending on what you choose and confirm the order, that's going to immediately impact what the manufacturing automatically does. So if I want to, I can click on manufacturing and view it from the sales app, but instead I'm going to go back over to manufacturing and say I'm the person in charge of manufacturing, and I've just seen this pop up. I have something I got to work on that came from sales. They're linked together. And you can see right here, it chooses these parts for the airplane, and it chooses the right color of paint based on the variant that was selected. So it's a really, really easy way of handling all that. It's really smooth. So you can have a lot of different variants, but you can control it with a minimal amount of BOM records. It's kind of nice. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and, in this case, I'm going to go ahead and check the availability of everything. It automatically allocates things, and you'll notice that it uses a different unit for the paint. And that's just something I want to touch on really, really quickly, is that it's not always just units. You can do really great stuff with weight. You could do stuff with length, that kind of stuff. In this case, it's volume, gallons. And since we're tracking the paint by gallons internally, you can go over here to units of measure, and you'll be able to see where all those things are defined. And basically, there's different categories, and each one of these things, you get to relate it to another thing. So in the case of the paint, I actually had it set up so that you consume it by the gallon, but you buy it by the liter. And that's handled through a conversion, stuff like that. Again, I don't want to get too much into all the nitty-gritty details. I just want you to know it's an option, and it works really, really well for food industries. It works really, really well for anybody working with, wood materials, glass cutting, anything like that. Units of measure, very, very important part of manufacturing in general. Okay, cool. So moving back to the slides as we're going. One thing that I want to highlight that we just saw there was the relationship between sales and manufacturing. And so that highlights the integration aspect of it. And I think a lot of times it's really good to view the integration in terms of workflow diagrams like this. So what we did, just so it makes perfect sense, is we sold a product in the sales app. And as soon as we did that, it created a delivery in the inventory app. So we had to ship it out to a client, but it also created a manufacturing order for us. And this happened automatically. Once we finish the manufacturing order, it automatically gets allocated to that delivery, and then we can ship it out. So it's a very basic, but it's a very important workflow that you have in Odoo that shows how these three apps are kind of connected. A slightly more involved workflow diagram to show is when we involve purchasing. So basically, I'm going to do the same thing where you sell a product in the sales app, and it creates a delivery, so you need to ship it out to a client, and it also creates a manufacturing order, so you need to build it. But let's just say that before we can build it, we need to actually buy a component for this manufacturing order. In other words, we don't have the component in stock. We only buy it if we need it for a manufacturing order. So you can have the system set up so that it automatically creates a manufacturing or a purchase order right here in the purchase app. And then when you send that out, it generates a receipt to receive it back into stock. Once you've received it back into stock, it automatically gets handed over to the manufacturing team. They can put it together, and then they can ship it out. So it's a multi-step process, but it's handled really well and really smoothly because of the integration that we have. And so to show that real quick, let's do another quick example. And I'm going to go sales to manufacturing to purchase and use these three apps together. And I'm also going to show how the availability pops up inline. I'm going to talk about lots and serial numbers while we're at it, because that's a really important feature that we have here. And related to that, we report on it through traceability. And I'm also going to touch on how it connects to the accounting app very, very, very briefly. I'm going to talk about how through this whole process, it can automatically be generating accounting entries for you that affect your overall stock journal. So yeah, let's go ahead and jump back into that again. Oh, there we go. Okay, so for this, I'm actually going to use a different product altogether. I'm going to use this toy robot product. And this product is a little bit different because you'll see over here that I set it so that we track it by unique serial number. Meaning that you don't just have, say, 10 robots in stock. You have 10 robots, and each one has its own unique number. And that number, in this case, is going to be automatically generated for us, which is kind of nice. But similarly, if you look at the bill of materials, one of the components that goes into it is this little motor. And let's just say the motor's got a warranty or something like that. One way or another, you want to be able to track the serial number for the motor itself. So that's why I set it up so that there's a serial number on the motor too. Okay, great. So I'm going to go ahead and go into manufacturing. And I'm going to skip the whole make to order thing at this point. I don't think we really need to in this case. But I'm going to go ahead and just enter a product for the robot. toy robot. And here's all the components listed out right here. I'll go ahead and say that looks good. And when you do that, you'll see the things that are available and the things that are not available. And I've set them all up, so it should automatically generate purchase orders for us. Let's see if it does. Going over to the Purchase app, that's where we handle the procurement of goods. That's where we buy things from our suppliers. You should see that a couple of purchase orders just got generated. That's this one and this one. These are the newest ones. And the reason I know that is because it points to the source document it came from. It came from manufacturing order number 15. And so I have got a couple right here. One of them is real simple. It's just these regular parts right here, a wind-up key and an arm. I'll say sure. I'm not going to go through a whole purchase tutorial because it takes a lot of time, but I'm just going to go ahead and point out that if we wanted to, we could email this to a vendor. In this case, I'm just going to confirm the purchase order. It looks good to me. And now we're waiting for these parts to come into stock. That's a receipt, basically. The other purchase order goes to a different vendor. And this is the one where it's a motor where we're going to be tracking it by serial number. So I'm going to confirm that purchase order too. So if I wanted to, I could click on receipt from the Purchase app and I could view the whole warehouse operations from here. But just to really highlight that these are different apps handling these things, I'm going to go into inventory and pretend to be the warehouse team. And from here, you'll see that there are 2 receipts that we're waiting on. That's from those 2 purchase orders we just confirmed. So the first one, from the Mechanical Brothers vendor, is just these simple parts right here. When you're receiving it as a warehouse worker, if you want to, you could print out an operation slip, like a pick slip or something like that. You can use barcodes, all that kind of stuff, but I'm just going to make it real simple and say, sure, we received it. It is now in stock. Good, so it's grayed out, meaning we've received it. We now have received 1 wind-up key and 2 robot arms. Then let's go back to this list of incoming receipts. Here's the other one, and this is for the motor. Now this one's a little different because we track it by serial number. So if I just try to say, yeah, we got it, it'll say, well, you need to tell me what the serial number is, that's good. You need to know that. So you can go ahead and enter that, and I'm going to click this little thing right here. And if you're receiving a whole bunch of things all at once, you could tell it what the first serial number is going to be, like that. And then you can say, yes, assign this to 20 serial numbers, and it'll just kind of spread them all out like that. And so it can work really well. In this case, it's just 1, so that's easy. You can also import serial numbers. If you're receiving a list and it's not predictable like that, it's all over the place, you can do that through a data import if you need to. But anyway, so I've just assigned that serial number to this incoming motor. Oh, I didn't say that, sorry. I forgot to actually click to assign it. Okay, cool. Now it's been assigned and we can receive it. Cool, so now we have the motor in stock and it's got that serial number. Both of those receipts that I just received should have gone automatically allocated to our manufacturing order. And sure enough, they did. It shows you right here that they have. And if you want to, you can view the information for it once we actually build it. And it'll show you afterwards which serial numbers got used. So yeah, so in this case, we've allocated it, we've built it, it's consumed these things, and a better way to view that, I would say, is the traceability report that we offer on every individual manufacturing order. If you click on that, you'll be able to drill into it and say, to make this toy robot, which got an automatic serial number generated of 3, you can drill into it and you'll see all the components that went into it, including the motor with its serial number, and then you can drill into that even further and you can see the specific warehouse operation that it came from. It's what we refer to as up and downstream traceability, so you can see the full thing for all of the different layers and all of the components that were involved along the way. Now, the other thing that I set up for this is that I actually set it up so that each one of these products is what we call first in, first out stock accounting costing method. And so if you look at, say, the robot leg right here, on the category level, I've set it up so that it uses first in, first out costing and it's automated inventory valuation. What that mostly means is that when you receive them in stock from, say, a purchase order and when you consume them, it has the potential to generate automatic journal entries for you. It should, based on the way we have it set right here, have created some journal entries in our accounting that reflects what you actually have in your inventory valuation. So if I go over to accounting right now, and I go over to my list of journal entries, you'll see that all these journal entries here were just created for me automatically when I consumed materials. First, some journal entries got created when I received it in stock, and then more journal entries got created when I consumed the materials and finished a good. You can also view that on the general ledger. Maybe it's a better way to look at it. And yeah, you can see in this journal, the stock valuation journal, there's debits and there's credits. Basically, debits for when things were received, credits for when things were consumed, and a debit for when the finished good was produced. All sorts of ways to view this. I'm not going to turn this into an accounting webinar or anything like that, but you can see that doing these things in manufacturing and in receiving has a direct impact on your accounting as well. And it can get pretty complicated and get pretty complex to configure this properly and stuff. So it's usually good to get a little bit of help if you have really specific requirements for how you want your automatic inventory valuation to work. So getting back into these slides and moving on, I just want to point out that as far as integration with other apps go, Odoo works really well for subcontracting. And so there's a lot of different ways subcontracting can be handled in Odoo. We have like 3 or 4 main methods, but the one that's very common that I keep running into is you might have a manufacturing order that you need to build, and at some part of the process, somewhere along the way, you need to send out what you're working on to a third-party subcontractor to do some work on. So maybe they are a machine shop and they have to do some drilling on something for you, or maybe they're a painting shop and they have to paint it for you and send it back. I don't know, it could be all sorts of things. So when you reach that point, you can have it set up so that it automatically makes a purchase order, just like we saw before, but it's not a purchase order to receive goods, it's a purchase order for services. And when you confirm that purchase order, it actually creates a delivery, or it can create a delivery for you to ship out components or ship out a subassembly or something like that, physical goods, to the subcontractor. So you're actually a purchase order that triggers a delivery to ship things out. And then say the subcontractor has it, they do the job on it, and then they send it back to you. Our system automatically makes a receipt to receive it back in. And then once it's received back in, it might return to the manufacturing order, and then maybe you take it from there and do the rest of the process. So I'm not going to show a demo of subcontracting right now because it just takes some time, but that's the main idea of it, and it's all through that automated integration that you get from these really good workflows because of the way our apps are connected. Okay, moving on to the next section, we're going to talk about scaling up a little bit. We're going to talk about scaling up your operations, and a good way to look at that is through talking about work order operations. So work order operations, it's a way to expand the scope of what you're doing, because so far we've just talked about materials tracking, which is super important, consuming components, producing finished goods. But a lot of manufacturers, at least half of the ones we work with, also need to deal with operation costs and time tracking, and not just the what, but also the how of manufacturing. And so a good way to visualize that is you've got this overall manufacturing order, just like we saw before, but you can set it up through work order operations so that you have a series of work orders. Maybe it's 1 work order, maybe it's 20 work orders, and each one of those can take place at what we call a work center. A good example of that would be you might have work order 1 or operation 1, which takes place at the drilling work center. And then it moves on, usually in a sequence, though it doesn't have to be a sequence, to the next work center, assembly. Then it goes on to painting, and then it's done. So it might have to go through these different operations at these different centers to complete. And furthermore, if you want to go even in greater detail, each one of these operations can be configured so that you have a series of steps that need to be taken place. So that's very granular. Do this, please do this. And the steps can actually also be quality checks too, which I'll show you in a second. It's optimized for tablets, although you don't have to do it on a tablet, but you can imagine that it works really, really well for assembly line operations, or just having a tablet right there at your center, at your station. It works really well like that. So we'll be able to show that in this next workflow. So we're still sticking with the toy manufacturing motif, but we're going to highlight some other kinds of stuff. I'm going to start with talking about work centers. We're going to talk about how to set up work order operations and integrate that into the manufacturing process. I will run through the different kinds of steps and quality checks you can do along the way, all using the control panel, as we call it. And at the end, I'll also highlight the cost analysis pop-up. So let's go ahead and jump over. I know there's a lot of jumping back and forth, so I hope it's not too horribly confusing. All right, so I'm actually using a slightly different database just for the ease of configuration, but trust me, it's the same company. We're still building toys. So if I go over into manufacturing right here, you'll notice it's a little different than what we saw before. This is what we call the Work Center dashboard. It shows you the different work centers, and it'll let you know if there's work being done on them, and it's got some quick KPIs. We don't have anything planned yet, but we will in a little bit. Let's go and look at the setup of this. Basically, if you look at your configuration, you'll have work centers. And this is where you get to create the different work centers, and for each one of these, you can set up all sorts of things. like what are the working hours of it? So this is going to help you a lot with your scheduling. Is it a standard 40 hours? Is it only available certain days of the week? How many hours per day? And there's also other information here that you can view here, like capacity, which will help you a lot for capacity planning. We'll talk about that more in a little bit. You can also do setup time. You could do time after for breakdown, and that will impact your planning. And very importantly, the cost per hour. And I've set this, even though we're just making toys, apparently this is a really, really expensive work center to operate. $4,500 per hour of overhead. That's okay though. There's also KPIs up here, but we'll talk about that later in reporting. And it's easy to make more work centers if you need to. So the way that it ties together is that if we go and look at our products here, I have a product called the RC wooden car. That's what we're going to be building. It's got a bill of materials, just like we saw before with other things. There it is. But there's this other tab over here next to the components called operations. And here's where you get to say, well, to build this, in addition to using these components, we're also going to need to go through these different work order operations. And you'll see that each operation you get to specify, does it take place at a work center or not? And they do. And what are the different steps that you have to follow to go through? The setup of it's pretty easy. You get to go ahead and specify if there's a worksheet that you need to follow. You can also use a Google slide that points to a video if you need to. Videos can always work as a tutorial. And then you can set up these different steps along the way that you follow. And there's a lot of different kinds of steps, which I'll just show you how they work instead of going through the process of configuring it. So let's go ahead and build a RC car. Remote controlled car. Or maybe I called it something else. Oh yeah, I called it RC wooden car. All right, so we're going to build this car right here. It is wanting us to use these components. That's easy. You're used to all that stuff at this point. I'm going to go ahead and confirm it. And what it should do is it should say that these are work orders that need to take place. And these are the expected durations for how long it thinks these work orders are going to take. And if you wanted to, you could have the kind of process where you're actually just starting and stopping from here. That's for a relatively simple operation where you don't really need detailed steps. You really just want to be able to say, okay, we've begun this, we've moved on. And that works really well for a lot of simpler business operations and stuff. But in this case, instead, I'm going to go and plan it out so it actually hits the schedule, and then you're going to see it show up over here on your main work center dashboard. And you have to imagine this is designed for end users that are on the shop floor to be interacting with. And they'll see, oh, I guess I have something I've got to work on right now. So they log in, they go ahead and see I've got to do an assembly. And this is the work center control panel. And the control panel you have a lot of, well, control over. Like I said, it is optimized for tablets to work with. And here's just a quick run through of how these steps might unfold. In this case, it's saying you can attach, or it's a simple instruction. It's telling us attach these wheels to the axles and use the glue gun. Sounds good, I'll do that. Oh, you have to tell it that you're making one. That's important. And then the next step in the process, this is actually asking us to register a lot number. So just like we saw before where we used lot numbers as part of the process, or serial numbers, it wants me to tell it what is the lot number that we're using for the controller. And you can choose from a drop-down, maybe create one on the fly. You can also use a barcode at this point if you need to scan the lot number that you're using. But that looks good, moving on. And then the third step here is go ahead and assemble the car and take a photo. So it might require you to take a photo, which depending on what you're doing, sure, a photo of a baby in a rhino costume. Depending on what you're doing, you might be able to use your tablet for it. That would be super convenient and easy to do. And then when you're done with it, it'll give you a little readout of the results of your different steps that you took if you have access to it. So that's pretty simple. Now there's another work order we have to finish off with, and maybe a different employee is going to do this. Maybe multiple employees will work on this. But as you can see, it says, please enter the serial number of the circuit board that you're using. It's similar to what we were doing before, except I just wanted to point out the difference between lot numbers and serial numbers. A lot number can pertain to a bunch of products. A serial number has to be unique to one specific component. Otherwise, they're the same thing. And so, yeah, I've just assigned the serial number to it. I'll move on to the next step. This is a quality check. It's asking us to input a value. It says measure the DC voltage. I'm going to go ahead and say 5.3. Because truthfully, even though it's wanting it to be right around 5.2, I've set it up so there's a range of acceptability. So as long as it's between, I think, like 4.9 and 5.6, it will pass. So that's the kind of example you can have. And that can pertain to all sorts of things. Weight, you can measure the weight. You can measure the angle of something, the length, whatever. And I'll just enter that value. And by the way, down below, instead of instructions, I do have it set up so that it should play a video. There's a guy that apparently talks about how to wire an electronic car, so that's cool. So anyway, so they could be referring to a video. A lot of people are that kind of learner instead. And then finally, this is just another quality check. It's saying, take it for a test drive. Is the car really fast? And that's a yes, no, simple pass, fail, check. Very common kind of quality check. I'll say it's passed and it's good. Great, so we completed both work order operations and all the steps involved, and then the manager can typically go and review it, see if it all looks good. If they want to, they can dive in and see the results of every single step. But then when it's all done, they can say it is finished. Oh, and when it's all done, looks like I chose a serial number that had already been used, unfortunately. That's interesting. I did a lot of wacky testing on this before I started this. But anyway, once it's all done, they should be able to view the overall cost analysis of the whole thing, which I'll show you in this other completed manufacturing order right here. And this is what it typically looks like. Basically, you have the breakdown of the components that were used and their different costs, and then the operation costs as well. So it takes the time that was spent on those work order operations, multiplies it times the cost for those, and it gives you an overall cost that you can view and break down. So pretty important stuff right there. All right, I'm going to move on. There's a lot more to talk about when it comes to work orders and operations and steps, but for now, I think that'll work. Okay, so another way you can scale up with manufacturing is just you can add a lot more apps, basically. You can add a lot more functionality beyond that because we have other apps that are specifically designed for manufacturers. I'm not going to do a demo of those because they can deserve their own webinars, but the quality app, we saw a little bit of that. Basically, you can have quality checks along the way in your manufacturing, and it also works really well for shipping and receiving. PLM is what we do for version control and versioning, so this allows you to clone your BOMs and your products and make new versions of them and make changes to them, and it's got a whole organized process for approvals to decide when they go into effect and not. Maintenance is a unique app. It's specifically if you have equipment related, like if you have machinery that's used as part of your work center, you can set up recurring maintenance that takes care of that and schedule that out. And repairs is kind of a secret weapon for us because it's a free app. We don't charge for it. You have to have manufacturing. But it's really powerful if you have the kind of business where you need to do work on manufactured goods after the fact, like aftercare, where you can remove a component and replace it with a new component. You can log time that you spend on it, and then you can bill people for it, and it will do a really nice invoice that breaks it down by materials and time. So repairs app's really good. Moving on to planning and reporting. Very, very, very important part of the process for some people. For some people, this is the most important part of it. I like to break it down by short-term planning and long-term planning. As far as short-term planning goes, you have a lot of options for things to work with. The better results you'll get will depend on how well you set up the parameters in advance. And some of the parameters to pay attention to that have an impact on planning, on the product form, on every product, manufacturing lead time is a good place to start. This basically determines if you need something, like especially if you sell it and it triggers a manufacturing order, this determines how much in advance you need to begin that manufacturing order if you want to get it done in time. And so that will affect planning for sure, the overall MO lead time. And then the security lead time is something that you can add to all of your manufacturing if you want to, and that basically gives you an extra safety level of days. So in this case, it would take 8 plus 5 and say 13 days before when you need it. So these affect your planning automatically too. Another thing that's really important that I touched on very briefly before is the capacity on the work center. So every work center, you can set a capacity, and that will determine how many simultaneous products can be built at a time at that particular work center. And so if it's already at capacity, then that will impact how much time it takes on the calendar automatically when it's scheduled out. And finally, the duration on the work orders, you can specify, is this something we just want to manually set up ourselves? And every time that we're planning, it's always going to take this chunk of your calendar out? Or do you want it to automatically be changing the duration by looking at real time, how long did it actually take you to build each thing that you build? And you can continuously be updating that and taking an average of, say, the last 10 operations that you did. So all of these things impact what happens automatically with Odoo. So when you first click the plan button on a manufacturing order, it's going to create work orders that show up on your schedule, and where they show up and when they show up is all impacted by these different parameters. And we actually did a lot to improve it in version 14 a couple months ago to make it so that changes down the chain, like if you make some changes to a sales order deadline, for example, it can go back and update the deadlines related to the manufacturing order and the work orders as well. So it's that integration is maintained because of all these planning impacts. So short-term planning, I really recommend people use this as much as they possibly can. It's intuitive, it makes a lot of sense, it's easy to work with, but basically the calendar view, once you have some work orders that have been planned out, you can actually make modifications and change it and manipulate it. Here's just a little looping GIF right here that shows what calendar view looks like for these different work orders. The color refers to what work center is it related to. And as you can see, you can drag them and drop them around and move the calendar around. If you feel like there's too much happening on Thursday, you can balance it out, move it to a different day or a different time slot, something like that. And then if you click on one of them, you'll get information and you can dive into it. There's a lot more to it than that, but that's the basics of it. Now, Gantt view, on the other hand, is another form of short-term planning view that's really, really good for reassigning or redistributing or reallocating it to maybe a different work center. So it's not necessarily based on the time that it takes on the calendar. It's very valuable for distributing it to maybe what is available at a particular time. And so, for example, if you want to move it from one work center over to another work center, Gantt view works really well. As you can see, this is what the Gantt view typically looks like. You have the rows representing the different work centers and the different operations that are taking place. And you can easily just see, well, I don't really want to use CNC machine one this week because it's old and it's falling apart. I would rather move it to this one that's available over here. You literally just drag and drop it over. It's super easy to work with in that regard. So yeah, that's Gantt view. It also has some advantages. It identifies any late or overdue operations and lets you know. In this case, these little orange flags right here, if you click on it, it'll tell you that it is late. It should have already been processed, but it hasn't been. So if you want to, you can click replan, and it'll move it to the next available time slot automatically for you. And it's cascading too. So if you have one work order that's dependent on another, it'll move them both over. And that's undergone a lot of improvements in the last version update. So that's short-term planning. Long-term planning, a lot of that comes down to our master production schedule. We also have basic reordering rules, which are a form of long-term planning. They're like minimum stock rules to make sure you don't run out of something. But for something that has a much longer sales cycle or a much longer cycle to procure it and to build it, or just for anything where the demand is going to vary greatly over time, the master production schedule is recommended. And so this is kind of what it looks like. I'll break it down. Basically, there's a lot of information on this table, but it's pretty simple when you dive into it. You can choose what things show up on the MPS or not. We don't recommend that you put every single thing that you have on the MPS. It's really more for those things with variable demand or with long lead times. And so you can add a product to the master production schedule, and it'll do a little pop-up where you get to specify what is the safety stock value. So in other words, how much do we want to have left over at the end of the period, whether you're tracking it by weeks, months, days. This is how much you want to have left over just for safety. And then this is really important too, the maximum to replenish. This is what is the actual limit to how much you can produce or buy in that period. So maybe physically, even if you're trying your hardest and allocating as much as you can, maybe you can do a maximum of 30 in a given week, for example. So yeah, so those two parameters are important. Once you set those up for each product, it shows up as a row like this, and then you get this information for it. So for this table, you see each column represents a week. And like I said, you could do day, month, whatever. But in this case, it's weeks. And the things to pay attention to are, this is what you start with. You start with 14 at the beginning of the week. There's 14 tables in stock. That's what's expected then. And then you highlight the demand right here. And the demand, you do have to enter that manually. But you can display the actual demand side by side. What I mean by actual demand is if you have sales orders that are already confirmed, then you can have that show up next to it and say, yes, the sales orders mean that we have this demand. But this allows you to put whatever demand you want. This allows you to say, based on last year's results and just my gut instinct and the impact of the pandemic, I think the demand is going to be 12 in that week. And so it knows that starting with 14 and fulfilling the demand of 12, you'll have 2 left over. And then it says, well, to hit your 10, which is what you want to have at the end of every week, we recommend you build 8, which makes sense. 2 plus 8 will give you the 10. And then it'll take that value and it'll move it over to the next week, and so on and so forth. It just goes down the chain through all these different columns over time. And it'll also highlight, it'll let you know if you're going to run into trouble, because in this case, your demand is so high, it exceeds what you can actually supply. And when you see something like that, it gives you the opportunity to basically go in and change some things and say, well, I'm actually going to build more this week, and I'm going to build more this week, and I'm going to change my demand. You basically interact with it and treat it kind of like a worksheet to solve problems in advance. And then down below here, you'll see a component. This is not a finished good, this is a component because the MPS is very useful for components too. The table leg, basically, it is a component that belongs to the table. There's 4 legs in this table, and so that's why you have, instead of regular demand, you have the indirect demand. So because there's a demand of a certain number of tables over here, it'll impact what your indirect demand is down below. And that's really important because you might have a lot of finished goods that use the same components over and over again, and that component indirect demand will add up as a result. And so once you have all this set up, you like it the way it looks, and as long as it's clicked with replenish, it's going to continuously automatically generate manufacturing orders and automatically generate purchase orders. And it's smart enough to know how far in advance it needs to create those things so that you'll meet all of your different demand deadlines. So yeah, it's pretty valuable, long-term planning. We like this tool, and it's gotten a lot of value, even though it can be a little complex, and it doesn't hurt to get some help on the best ways to use it. So then that's planning. Talking about reporting, on the other hand, which is also really important. I don't have a huge amount to say because reporting across the board in Odoo, it's meant to be user-friendly, which means it's pretty simple in a good way. The basic idea is that if there's data, then there's ways to report on it. And there's easy ways to view that data in different layouts. So we already kind of saw a little bit of it. Basically, traceability, that shows you the breakdown of serial numbers and lot numbers and where they're used in a finished manufacturing good. Product moves, that'll show you the stock moves, what got created, what got consumed. And then the cost analysis shows you the breakdown of materials and operations. Over here, this is just a visual bar graph view that you might use to see something like what products are planned to be worked on and what products have actually been completed in a given period. Sometimes bar graph is the way to go, and it's a nice way to visualize it. There's filters that you can use for any of our reports when you dive deep into it, whether it's pivot view or graphical view. You might want to do a filter that just shows you anything that's waiting for components right now. You might want it to highlight the things where you have a planning issue, so like if you're overdue on something. And then warnings, because you could set up all sorts of different warnings and alerts across the board, and you can really zero in on those. So these are built-in tools to help you with your reporting. And sometimes you want just something really, really simple, honestly, where you just want to see a pie chart that shows you how many products were completed of a different site. And then these are interactive pie charts too. So if you click on something, it'll remove it from view and things like that. Pretty standard. And if you look at any Odoo video about reporting, it's the same kind of tools over and over again, and manufacturing is no different. One thing that did get added recently is our built-in spreadsheets. It's kind of like our own built-in Excel. And so there's definitely opportunity to potentially take data from manufacturing and feed it into a custom spreadsheet if that's something you need for your own particular reporting. That's manufacturing reporting in general, but if we get more specific to the work order operations, so those are the things that are taking place at work centers, they have their own reports that are really specific. The OEE is a pretty complicated one that we have that, in a nutshell, shows you the overall efficiency of that work center minus, so it's utilization minus downtime. And downtime is usually from delays or from like if it broke down because there's a maintenance issue or something like that. And that lets you know what work centers have the highest OEE and which ones don't. It'll also give you a readout on time that was lost and wasted because of delays. Load means planned demand for that work center and how much it's going to be used. Different ways to view it. Any of these smart buttons, you click on it, it'll take you to a specific readout of it that you can interact with. There's other valuable views. This shows you the deviation from what was expected time. So I don't really need to get into it too much, but it lets you know that if you are completing things faster or slower than you expected to, it'll let you view that deviation. And then also just if you finish any work order, you'll always be able to pull up a report showing the results of all those steps and all those quality checks that you completed over time too. And if they didn't pass, you can see why and when and who did it, all that kind of stuff. That's reporting. So the last main section is the flexibility of the platform. And honestly, in a lot of ways, this is not just Odoo manufacturing, but Odoo's biggest strength in a lot of ways. Because it's an extremely customizable platform, and I can safely say it's more customizable and more easily customizable than most of what else is out there. I really think that. Without necessarily being extremely expensive too. And flexibility is good, but the reason behind why flexibility is good is because it just gives you more control. It allows the system to adapt more to specific needs. And that's kind of why we're able to work with so many different industries, is because, well, yeah, it's not geared towards one specific thing, but you can mold it and change it as you need to. So it's also really good for any processes where you can't really predict it. So we're talking about custom manufacturing, we're talking about just-in-time kind of stuff, where you might be a job shop and everything you work on in your shop floor is completely different than what you've done before. It's great to have a flexible system for that. And so some of the things you can do as far as processes go is you can deviate from the bill of materials. So even if you have a bill of materials that says you're going to use these many components, you're going to use these operations, you can change it as long as you have access and as long as you allow it. And you can also create a manufacturing order without a BOM at all, which is kind of cool. So I'm going to go ahead and do my, I think, final little demo right here. If we go into manufacturing, I'm going to build another RC wooden car. But maybe you're the kind of business that allows your customers to make special requests, and you try to be flexible because customers are always right. So even though the bill of materials says we're going to use the car body and then the toy axle and the wheels and stuff, maybe the customer says, I'd like you to use these other wheels instead because they look a lot cooler or something. So you might remove the wooden wheel from that bill of material on this manufacturing order, and you might choose a different one. We'll call it specialty wheels. And I'm actually adding this product on the fly. It doesn't already even exist in my system. Now you can specify all the specifics of it. You can get into it. You can choose a vendor. You can choose the cost, all that. But I'm just going real quick. So we'll say specialty wheels. We'll do 4 wheels right there. And then in addition to that, maybe the customer has requested that you do a special paint job on it. So you might add another work center operation, and I'll call it painting operation. And I will say, of course, that takes place at our painting station. And you can say, well, it's probably going to take a really long time because it's a really elaborate request or something like that. And then you can confirm it and go through the process. And I should just add that these changes that I made, you can actually make these changes during the process, and you can also make it after the process. And for really engineered order kind of processes, you could just start a manufacturing order and not even have a bill of material. You could call it brand new product. Well, I misspelled that, but you get the idea. And you can start adding components and adding work orders, and you don't even have a bill of materials because it's that flexible. So we're pretty happy about that. And some of those changes have just happened recently, but it's really made it a lot easier for clients. But another form of customizability, which I'll just touch on real fast, is not just the processes and the amount of flexibility you have in the way you manufacture, but it's also the system itself. And so you can make a lot of changes largely using the Studio tool, but also through things like development and third-party apps. Basically, Studio, if you haven't seen it already, it allows you to change fields that are already in there and rename them. It allows you to change the properties of those fields a bit. You can make new ones. You can create connections with other apps. That's really important to be able to do that. You can create new menus that meet your needs and are more user-friendly or intuitive to you. And then you can do some pretty impressive automated actions too. Whether you need some help for it or not, that's a different story, but the tools are there and it's easy to make it happen really quickly. So yeah, Odoo Studio, big source of that customizability. But we also have some really good third-party apps, including a couple third-party apps that we ourselves have created and put it on the App Store just as an add-on in case you need it. So that's part of the benefit of our ecosystem being what it is with Odoo. And then, of course, if necessary, you can hire either Odoo internal or maybe a third party, a partner or something like that to do some special development and actually write code if you need something really complex. So a couple examples of that real quick. Some of the changes might be extremely small, but you need to do it just to please your boss, or you need to do it because the people on the floor are having a hard time adopting the platform because they're used to seeing a certain thing. So you can do really, really simple stuff like what I actually did at the beginning of this demo. I decided I wanted to have the image of the component in my bill of materials on the BOM lines. I like it. I don't know. Like I said, I'm a visual person. So that was really easy to do. I did that in like 5 seconds with Odoo Studio. Don't need to be a developer to do that kind of stuff. It's drag and drop. But some other changes are actually really important, really necessary. And so here's an example from a database that I saw where they had added, I didn't do this, where they added all these different fields that are a necessary part of their manufacturing process. Is this a ITAR or necessary production, for example? Are we going to put something on a calendar? So just keep in mind, most of what I've showed you today is all out of the box standard stuff, but in a real Odoo database, there's usually some degree of customizations that comes in the form of custom fields that collect specific custom data that you need. And a good example of a customization that we've done for people just using Studio is actually planning work orders by employee. Because what I showed you earlier for planning was planning by work center. And that's the default way to do it, where you're assigning a work order to a different work center based on time. But a common request is people actually want it to be assigned to an employee specifically, and then if there's an employee available, assign it to them. It doesn't work that way out of the box, because out of the box, it's really more open and any employee can go and work on any work order. But if you want it this way instead, which is normal, all you have to really do is you add an employee field with Studio on the work order. So then you can click on it, it's a drop down. It links to your actual employees list in Odoo, and then you assign it to somebody. Then I created a custom menu over here called Employee Planning. And when you pull that up, basically it's a Gantt chart view that shows you, instead of work centers, it shows you employees. You can see which ones are unassigned, and you can drag it and move it to an employee that is available at that time. Very simple and very easy, and that took like 2 minutes with Studio. So this is the kind of example of ways that you can make the platform be what you need it to be, if it's not already there. And then finally, just there are also some expansions available in our app store. Like I mentioned, some of them are third party, and some of them are really complex, some of them are really specific and for niche industries. But one that has been used a few times is one that we created. One of our senior consultants, Ray Carnes, made this one based on popular demand that allows for a different way of incorporating overhead costs and service costs inside manufacturing costing. Because it does, to a certain extent, it's just there are certain ways where you might want to also incorporate, say, labor costs in a different way, separate from the work center costs. And so there's this free module that we offer that you can just download and install that will expand the capability. And yeah, that's just an example of ways that you can really adapt and customize the platform. So to summarize it, basically what we saw today, and hopefully what you got out of it, is that our manufacturing platform at its core, one of its main focuses is that it connects with other apps. So you have sales orders that can trigger manufacturing orders. It has a direct relationship with inventory where it's consuming materials and producing materials so you can ship them out. It can trigger purchase orders, so you have to buy materials before you can actually do anything. And then it can feed into accounting in the form of creating automated accounting journal entries for you, depending on how you have that product set up. But then, at any time, doesn't have to be now, but at some point, you can increase the scope of what you're doing and scale up by incorporating work center operations. So you're actually tracking time and saying step by step what needs to happen. You can add these different apps that we have that give you expanded functionality beyond that for manufacturing. We think that the planning and reporting is really, really easy and really user-friendly, so it should be easy to utilize from the short-term planning to the long-term planning, and then nice visual or just very data-driven reports to look at. And then, like we just saw, it's very, very customizable, allowing you to do flexible changes to the components and finished good if you want to, or allowing you to change the quantities during or after a manufacturing order. And then through things like Odoo Studio, you can easily drag and drop and completely change the platform and build new processes as needed. But the last thing I'd leave you with is basically manufacturing is complicated. There are some parts of Odoo that are really DIY, and you can figure out, how to use the survey app pretty easily on your own, for example. But manufacturing, there's a lot of potential for getting into a discussion. And so honestly, I really recommend one way or another, try to reach out to an expert, whether that is somebody that works at Odoo, like from our internal services teams, whether it's me and somebody on my team that helps you evaluate, or whether it's a third party or somebody from our partner network or something like that. One way or another, I just recommend don't be shy, because some of these things, they just take time to think through, to get some experience, and sometimes it's just a matter of making decisions. Do you want to do this, and do you want to do it now? Do you want to do it later? Has it been done this way in the past? And we're here to help you. As somebody pointed out on a YouTube channel recently, one of the big strengths of Odoo is the fact that there is this strong ecosystem and support network out there that can help you if you need it. And that's it. So I'm going to actually jump over to trying to answer questions now, if there's any left over. I know this is kind of the end of the hour, but I think we can go about 10 minutes for questions, if that's okay. So let's see. I'm trying to see if there's any questions that haven't been answered. Tyrone and Matt Shepard are both, and Loredana, oh good, are all on my team here in San Francisco office, and they're all very senior and very expert, so I'm glad they're answering some questions. But I don't know if there's anything else that needs to be answered. I'm trying to see if there's anything left over. See, somebody said beep, bop, beep. Some of us are not people. That's interesting. As far as I could tell, all the main questions have been asked. Does anybody want to ask any last questions before we wrap it up and before we go? Looks like there's still a conversation going on. I recommend if you're having a current conversation with one of our experts, just go ahead and reach out to them directly. If you need an email, you can email me and I can get you in touch with the right person. You're welcome to email me as well. But I just want to say thank you, everybody. We really appreciate your time, and it's great to have you as part of the overall Odoo organization and ecosystem. Have a great day. Bye.